This episode brought to you by How to Write Manga, your complete guide to the secrets of Japanese comic book storytelling. Available wherever fine ebooks are sold.
The world has gone insane. Cosplayers rule the conventions. Gamers dominate the tabletop and the internet. Sci-fi subjugates the movies, and fantasy rules the bookstore with an iron fist. Only one group can bring order to this unruly mob. A team of uber geeks, masters of the nerdly arts, trained for decades in the hobby shops and basements of the nation. Mobilized by the secret masters, they are the Department of Nerdly Affairs.
Down. So, 1,
2,
3,
4,
5,
6,
7,
8.
9.
and Jack is the winner this time. All right. Hello, operatives, and welcome to the Department of Nerdly Affairs. I'm your host, Rob Patterson, here with my co-host, Don Chisholm.
I attack!
Roll a d20, Don.
I got a 17.
And the armor class. Oh, you did it. Congratulations. All right. As you might guess, dear listeners, tonight we're going to be talking about role-playing games again. Except this time, we're going to go hardcore into Dungeons & Dragons, the role-playing game. The role-playing game that most people think about when you say the word tabletop role-playing. And to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, we of course have brought in a fellow old-school, old-timer who has many tales to tell, has lived through many adventures, Jack Ward. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Oh, it's so good to be had back. Thanks, folks. I'm an old timer. It's so... Just a second, I gotta roll. I'm happy to see you.
What did you roll, Jack?
I rolled an 18. According to my charisma and my comeliness, which is not useful here on a podcast.
Jack, you are the most charming guy ever. Congratulations. The audience loves you.
Thank you. That's why I was always a paladin, because I thought I could get girls.
Yep. Okay. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. All right. So, I was always a thief because I thought I could just steal crap. But, yeah, that was me. Anyway, so, yes, folks, tonight we're going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons, the original tabletop role-playing game, or at least the original fantasy tabletop role-playing game. Because it, of course, evolved out of miniatures wargaming, which predated it. Mm-hmm. And specifically, it evolved out of was it actually a homebrew, or were they playing a specific tabletop war game when they came up with it?
It was both.
It's both, because we're talking about, should be
Chainmail.
Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, correct?
Yep, and Rob Kuntz.
Rob Kuntz, okay.
Yeah.
And so they were playing a tabletop war game, a miniatures-based war game, which of course was about, I'm assuming was a standard one, or was it actually medieval? Or did they make it medieval? What's the story, Don? Tell me, I'm confused.
Okay, the way that it worked, the Dungeons & Dragons comes right out of the Chainmail tabletop role-playing game. Role-playing, right. You're making me do it now. Tabletop war game.
Mm-hmm. Which I have, the original Chainmail.
Yeah, is it the original or is it 9th edition?
It's spirally small.
Silver cover?
Yeah.
Fantasy supplement included?
I don't know if the fantasy supplement... I haven't seen it in a while. I'll have to pull it out and take a look at it again. Literally. Oh, just a second. Here it is. Of course. I keep it right back here.
Oh, wow.
Chainmail Rules for Medieval Miniatures by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin. Oh, sorry. I lied. 3rd edition.
Mm-hmm.
I have 3rd edition,
mm-hmm.
so... The 3rd edition came out 1979 in April.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right. 1st edition was 1971.
Yeah.
So it sounds like they released quite a few editions of that game.
They did, I think. Well, if you count the modern version, they did. I think there's like 10 or 11 different versions. Although each version isn't really that different. Mm-hmm. It tends to just get reorganized a little better. It's kind of the same thing that happened to D&D.
Right. Yeah, it's to be expected.
Yeah, because the original Chainmail, it's a historical tabletop war game.
Right.
And they
That's
include...
the name.
Pardon?
Thus the name, Chainmail.
Well, yeah, well, they include different kinds of troops from all kinds of different eras and that.
Mm-hmm.
And what had happened was at one point, I think we got into the basics of this before on the show here. They added a fantasy supplement,
Mm-hmm.
which, there's two important things. They added a fantasy supplement, and they did a man-to-man combat system for it.
Right.
And those are important because Chainmail uses one term that war games still use, but they used it different, and that was scale.
Mm-hmm.
That Chainmail was designed for a 1 to 20 scale.
Right.
Which means one piece on the table represents 20 troops.
Okay.
Sure.
And then they did the second part of it, which has the jousting rules and the man-to-man system, is what they called 1-1 scale, which nowadays for tabletop gaming, 1-1 scale means like real life.
Right, yeah.
So just in case anyone picks it up and wonders about, man, I got to get some big-ass miniatures.
Well, yeah, those would be rather big miniatures. That's true.
Yeah.
I've seen what a 1-to-1 scale Gundam looks like, and let me tell you, it's impressive.
So here's a question before we go any further. And I know I don't want to jump ahead, but is Chainmail related at all to the battle systems supplements they had out in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd Edition? Because I'm holding it right now.
Yeah.
I've got both battle systems and battle systems skirmishes, and I didn't know if they came from Chainmail originally or not.
No, it's something completely different.
Okay.
You can put them back on the shelf, Jack.
I'm doing that right now.
Okay.
The man comes prepared.
He did.
So yeah, and that's Chainmail's the progenitor, and I think it's kind of important to take into account. At the time of the late 60s going into the 70s, there was a sword and sorcery boom. And that was where the fantasy supplement that they did for Chainmail, I'm betting, came out of that.
Where did that come from? Was that because of the science fiction fantasy writers like Michael Moorcock and Lord Fowl's Bane and all that kind of stuff came in the 70s as well, or was that something that was happening elsewhere? Do you know?
Yeah, I think what ended up happening, Tolkien came back, because when Tolkien came out in the 30s, like, nobody cared.
Right.
But what happened in the 60s was, because of Led Zeppelin, Tolkien got popular.
Oh, right. This harkens back to your heavy metal show.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Hyperlink here. Go
Yep. There will be.
Yep. And then what ends up happening from that, I think what you also got even going into the 70s was you had the psychedelic experience. You had, when you go into the 70s, you had a lot of alternative spiritualism. People weren't into the establishment. They were looking for all this different stuff. They were looking to expand their consciousness. Spiritualism came in. The New Age stuff came in.
Human potential movement was big then. Yep.
Yeah, there was all kinds of that. And part of what came into that was the fantasy thing, the magic, the sword and sorcery. And I think that was a big part of what ushered that in.
Makes sense.
And anybody who listened to like our Apocalypse RPG show, which at the moment we're recording this hasn't gone up yet, when you got into that era too, you also had a lot of science fiction was apocalyptic. And it was post-apocalyptic because people were getting worried environmentalism was just starting up. People were just realizing, wait, dumping shit in the ocean matters. And I think
the crying native by the side of the road.
Yep, exactly.
I just remembered that commercial.
And that was part of, if you remember at that time, there was a lot of that. There was give a hoot, don't pollute.
Sure.
With Woodsy the Owl, there was a lot of that kind of thing. And I think that's where you started seeing some overlap. Because like we were saying, post-apocalypse and sword and sorcery have a lot of similarities. And when you've got the spiritualism, the magic, the psychedelia, that plays into it, that lends itself more to sword and sorcery.
Yep.
If I may throw something in here, there's a book by Monica Hules called Hunter in the Dark. Have you ever read it? It's a young adult book.
No.
And I was actually living in London at the time and taking this children's course. So I was up in Rob's neck of the neighborhood, and children's literature course, and they were talking about how a couple of things, which was interesting. Number one, in children's books, food replaces sex is what you'd have in other books. So that's an interesting thing. The other thing was that she saw certainly a sort of a line going along that went from reality, and if you followed along the line too far, you get into fantasy, right? And then sort of like some stories would sort of break between reality and fantasy, and you have C.S. Lewis. But on the other side of reality, you would have psychology. And so you would get into like Jungianism and stuff like that so far down the line that somewhere along there, psychological aspects would actually fuse with reality or with fantasy on the other side. So there's this interesting continuum between which was like heavy reality, psychology, reality, and fantasy, and the heavy reality and fantasy connected together. So I can see that being an aspect too in the 70s because everybody was in their heads, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's
that thought LSD.
Well, and that's in a lot of ways what you're getting at was what a lot of the psychedelia was about.
Right.
That it was that weird, and then the LSD helped, but it was expanding consciousness by blurring that line between, say, reality or perception of reality and fantasy.
Right. Very cool.
Yeah.
So D&D started in 74. That was the first original box set.
Yep.
So that's early on in that.
Yep.
Cool.
And the same thing too, like the chainmail thing, adding the fantasy supplement. If you've seen it, it's very Tolkien-esque. And I think that's something that you see persist into different editions because The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings especially, kind of formed the basis for the type of fantasy and the type of sword and sorcery that D&D evolves into.
Exactly. Like, for example, prior to D&D, elves were basically these little sprites that lived in the forest. Like, the idea of the Tolkien elves, or the D&D elves, is completely Tolkien elves. Like, that's where it comes from. And so I would argue that basically Dungeons & Dragons, for the most part, especially the early edition, is just a Tolkien role-playing game. It's just, it's just got the name filed off.
That's why they kind of made halflings instead of hobbits. They couldn't use the name. Right?
Yeah, so. They did it first. Like, I believe
if I remember,
yeah, if you go through Chainmail, they do reference hobbits. But there were other influences too, because like Robert E. Howard and specifically Conan played a part. Because if you look at troop types in the original Chainmail, they reference the hero and the superhero, which are the Conan-esque mighty warrior that wades in and just hacks through like an entire army on his own.
Right.
Well, later on, there you have the barbarian character class, right? And that certainly is harkens to Conan for sure.
More than a little, we'll say.
More than a little.
Well, because everyone wanted to play Conan. Remember, that was done during the time when there were a ton of Conan comics and novels. There was practically a Conan craze at that time, especially in the 70s.
Well, and I will not admit that I do have a character in Skyrim that looks exactly like Conan.
You don't have to admit it, Jack. We all knew it anyway.
That's right.
So basically they created a Tolkien role-playing game with the names filed off, so to speak. Once the Tolkien lawyers got a hold of them, they filed the names off anyway. That also explains why the elves in first edition D&D are just massive. I mean, there's literally no reason not to play an elf if you want to kick ass in first edition D&D. Well, early editions of D&D.
There's only one reason. There is one reason, and that is limited character levels.
Yep.
Right? So that was the way that they identified why you'd want to play a human. Humans had the ability to be dual class characters with unlimited levels. So I mean, once you decide on your second class, you had to stop your first class, but still you could. So I would have a character that might be 75th level mage and 45th level fighter, and you couldn't do that with the original rules with the elves. They stopped at like 12 or something.
Well, hold on a sec here. You're definitely talking about AD&D later on, because original D&D, the levels only go up to like 10 to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, there's catches to that.
Okay. Tell us, Dungeon Master.
to nerd it up, you said that
this is the nerd show.
Yeah, you said that what was the term you used for humans could be
dual class?
Yeah, they're not exactly. There's dual class and multi-class.
Yeah, that's right. They could be multi-class, which was a cool thing. You could get an elf, which was a magic user, cleric, a thief, which was a cool thing to do. Yeah.
You guys are referring to AD&D. Original D&D, you were just an elf. You were just a wizard. You were
very, very, very original D&D. Because when the white box set came out, there were ideas in that kind of disappeared afterwards and came back in later editions. In the very, very, very original one, depending on because there's technically two versions. There's the Greyhawk version and the Blackmoor version. Right. But you would play like a dwarven fighter.
Right. Okay.
I'm looking at the web page right now on Wikipedia for the 1974, which is the one I got. The one in 76, I think, or 78 or something. But the one in 74, the first 3 volume set that they have, they said there were just 3 character classes: fighting man, magic user, and cleric. 4 races: human, dwarf, elf, and hobbit. There you go. Yep. And only 3 alignments: lawful, neutral, and chaotic.
Yep. Right. But those races those races could actually be any of those 3 character classes?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case.
There were it worked in just like in what people who played AD&D remember.
Okay.
And there's level limits, and I don't remember 100%, but there are limits on who can be what. So I think dwarves can't be clerics in that edition as well.
Dwarves can't be wizards.
Oh, okay.
They can be illusionists, but they can't be wizards, right? So that's what they had, and I remember that's the 1977 box that I remember, right?
Well, that's more AD&D because and this is where it gets really weird and complicated with, again, the ideas coming and going. When they did Gygax did Greyhawk, and Arneson did Blackmoor, and they changed the mechanics because they added the rogue, which is your thief class.
Right.
Bard and Illusionist came later in early Dragon magazines. They were optional classes that you could add. And they came out kind of just at the point where White Box had become Red Box and AD&D.
Okay.
But that was...
that's it. See, I remember Advanced D&D having Illusionist and Magic User, and that was it. But it didn't have Rogue. It had Thief. Assassin, and Bard.
Yeah.
And Monk. There's Monk class in there too. And they got rid of the Monk eventually and moved everything. They got rid of the whole idea of an assassin. They sort of sat there and said everybody can be an assassin kind of thing. So that's why they got rid of that later on in the second edition, I think. So.
Yeah, well, because if you remember in AD&D, Illusionist is a subclass of Magic User. Assassin is a subclass of Thief.
Yeah.
And it kind of means certain things, but that played off of stuff that had come out in the original White Box.
Oh, okay.
Which, again...
Also, like, Ranger and Paladin were subclasses of fighters, so they all had their own subclasses, just like Druid was a subclass of a Cleric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that came... Because what ended up happening was the White Books came out. It was real difficult. Like, you couldn't just buy them and learn the game. Somebody had to teach you.
Right. Just because they were so badly organized?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
They wanted to do a re-edit of them that would be those rules in more legible form, and that's the original. I've seen it called Blue Box.
Right.
Which had a really small print run. You never ever see them. The one that they call Red Box, which became like basic, basic, advanced, companion, master, and immortal. That version comes after that one.
Yeah, whatever happened to expert? Because you had basic and expert and advanced, and expert sort of went off the map, and so did basic eventually. Like, I mean, once they got rid of, they sort of separated, and then they all came back together again in second edition. You never heard again of advanced or basic or whatever, right?
Oh no, they did stuff. What ends up happening is when the Red Box one was coming out, it was meant to be an introduction. Mm-hmm. And then the advanced Dungeons and Dragons rules was supposed to be, I guess you'd say, the main game.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they split off. There was kind of a dispute. There was a bit of a back and forth. They essentially became two completely different games.
The basic game was more role-playing based, right? And the advanced game was far more rules-based.
Yeah, no, because what ends up happening is they did basic and expert for D&D, and then it kind of languished a bit because advanced came out, and everybody shifted to that because there was more, again, like you say, there's more rules, there's more detail, there's more you could do with it. But by the mid-'80s, they brought back the other one, and they added the companion rules, the master rules, the immortal rules. Mm-hmm. Which kind of, they added more because they added, like, weapon specialization. So you could have a guy that would, you'd pick a specialization for a weapon, and every so many levels you'd pick another one. You could double them up, get different abilities with certain weapons. They added a skill system to that version. That came out with Tall Tales of the Wee Folk. Right. And it did kind of go more for more of the high fantasy, fantastical kind of thing. And it went for bigger, because in theory you could have your character go up past level 36 and become a god.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got the Immortals handbook here too, which is nice. But I thought that came out after during the second edition.
No, it came out kind of just before.
Oh, okay.
Like AD&D was still the big thing, and I don't know exactly why they brought back like the D&D thing, and they added the last 3 volumes to it and a bunch of extra supplements. But that kind of came out just before second.
Okay.
I love the Immortals rules because they give you like powers, so you don't have to have like any kind of equipment. You energize the equipment, so you use so many points of your powers, and you've got yourself a +5 defender sword.
Yeah,
right.
That was very cool, right? So then you just like, I don't need anything but me, and of course my energy would drop off, and I'd have to recharge or whatever. But it was a kind of a cool idea. So
right now, was there any like substantial, I should say, differences in play or feel between these original editions of D&D, or were they really just tweaking the rules?
Do you mean like for the master set?
Yeah, exactly. Well, just in general. Okay, as we're going from like say 1971 to 1981, for example, how does the game exactly evolve? Like, what are they changing here as they're going through?
Well,
do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's the D&D set, the extra bits, like basic and expert, kind of just advance your character. Mm-hmm. But when they did the third box, which is the companion rules, they had rules for kingdoms. When they did the master set, they added the rules for weapon proficiencies, which was something you could use with a first level character. Like these were rules that fleshed out the whole game, that if you were starting a new campaign, it would be good to have from the beginning.
Right. Yes, probably would be.
Yeah.
You know what's really cool that I thought about is like, I played the basic and then I played the advanced. I played a bit with the expert, but I found it very similar to the basic kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what I loved at the time about the advanced, which I probably wouldn't love as much if I were picking up the game right now, is because it was so detailed. it sort of gave me, because this was new, like nobody had played games like this before. So you were really sort of futzing around trying to figure out how this to be done well, especially me when I was like playing I was a DM constantly. So I was like always trying to figure out like how do you be a DM? So the more information they had, the better it was for me, even though it kind of hemmed you in. Nowadays, we're all so steeped in this universe that I think you could get by with a lot less rules because we've played it in video games. We watched so many movies about this. People would be so much easy. It'd be a whole lot easier for them to leap into this kind of mindset of doing sort of tabletop role-playing games. But at the time, it was like learning an entirely different language that nobody else you knew could speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, here, Jack, why don't you tell us about your very first exposure to Dungeons and Dragons? Do you remember it?
Well, I was thinking, yeah, I do, but I had an exposure earlier than that, and it was an exposure to Tunnels and Trolls.
Oh, okay.
And it was like an older friend of mine, Andrew Mestern. Shout out to Andrew. We wrote a lot together, like stupid, like we did our own version of Cracked and stuff like that. I mean, the comic, not the website.
Right.
And he had this like spiral-backed version of Tunnels and Trolls, and I thought that was really cool. And it was designed so that he could play it, first person. It was by Flying Buffalo, I think, is the company.
Yeah, I believe it was.
And so I thought that's kind of cool. And then I remember there was like I thought there was an Ogres game too that came with it, but I can never find it. So maybe it was just in my head. But then what happened was about when I was 13 or so, my friend, God rest his soul, Martin Agnew, passed away 21 years ago now. He bought like the basic D&D and brought it over to my place, and we played it. And this is pre-dice. We had chits. Right. So we had little like salt shaker bottles where we keep the chits in, and we'd have to pull out numbers, right? And out of 20, you'd pull out a number. It's like, oh, natural 20, or something like that.
Right.
And so we always picked, like, because it was just the two of us, we would always take like 3 characters each. And even though he was DMing it to begin with, he tried to sort of divorce himself a little bit from it. But you're kids, you want to have the biggest, strongest, whatever. So we'd always have like a fighter, a mage, and a cleric to heal us, right?
Right, of course.
And being the sexist people that we were, most of our clerics were female, right? At the time, we were kids, right? So
right, yeah, of course.
The healer, of course, had to be the female at the time. So so that's where my beginning was, and then we loved it so much. We would play almost every weekend, just the two of us. And then I started buying some stuff. I remember going to the mall in Guelph, and there was a bookstore there, and that's where you could get like the advanced Dungeons and Dragons books, and that's where I got and that's where we started making like our real jumps. And we also shared for like 3 or 4 years the Dragon magazine subscription, so much so that we were invited to like the 2nd or 4th Gen Con as DMs. They would have held a table for us. We were like 14 years old, and it was in Wisconsin. There was no way we could have gone, but at the time it was like it was so cool. It was bragging rights that these Dragon magazine wanted us to play Dungeons and Dragons at a Gen Con. So
that's awesome.
That was pretty cool. So that was like the very beginning of it for me. Yeah. What was yours? Because I don't think D&D was as big for you as it was for me, and I think the reason was, like, beyond the fact that I love fantasy, it's not one of your favorite things. But by the time you guys are a little younger than I am, so there were a lot more options by the time you came around.
Don, do you want to go first?
Well, you go first.
Okay. The truth is, when I first played D&D, I think I've mentioned this on the show before, I hated it. Right. I was basically roped into playing D&D at a friend's birthday party, and I thought this thing was stupid. And I didn't like it at all. Now, keep in mind, I was not a big fantasy fan when I was a kid. I didn't hate it. It wasn't, I just didn't have that great love of fantasy. So, and by the way, we're talking somewhere around like 1979, 1980 is roughly when I'm what I'm talking about here. Around the around the 80s, or 1980. And so at that point, I'm just not interested in fantasy stuff. I tried it out again with friends later on, didn't care much for it then. And in truth, I think I mentioned this before, I got into gaming through superhero role-playing gaming. Because I was exposed to that. And once I discovered and I was a huge superhero fan, so discovering there were superheroes, I'm like, hey, I'm down for this. And the Battletech role-playing game, Mech Warrior, got into that. That was awesome. So I was totally down for this stuff. And eventually, by being part of an actual role-playing group, they wanted to play D&D and that, and so I ended up playing D&D, but not very often actually. The group I belonged to, with Chad is a member of as well, or was. We didn't really play that much D&D. Like, it was actually pretty rare. We were so busy playing superhero and sci-fi and other games that we didn't play that much D&D in general. So D&D is not something that I have like these great fond memories of, like you guys, for whatever reason. I actually don't.
Wow.
Sorry, I know it's blasphemy, but so D&D was not my role-playing game. Partly again because, as Jack just said, I came in later when there was more options, and so they just attracted me more.
Right.
And the crazy people I hung out with as well.
And I think all the church women from Bad came over and talked to him. The people who did bothered about Dungeons and Dragons came and had a good conversation with him and talked him out of it.
Well, I probably knew more about D&D because of Bad and because of those things that were going on than I did because of actual exposure to the game. Really. Yeah. I mean, I knew what it was. I even read the rule book, I think, at one point when I was a kid, but I just never saw the appeal. Not to any great degree anyway.
Wow.
Greatest marketing campaign ever, right?
Yeah.
Tell kids it's bad for them.
And they will go to it.
Yeah, and because that was the thing. Like, when I started with that weird kind of pre-red box, blue box kind of thing, which I remember being about 7 years old and reading it at Steak and Burger after picking it up at Leisure World at the mall. But I can remember, like, for a couple of years. Being like and this is when like D&D was it. There were no other games really,
right?
And it was kind of a lonely time because you'd get the odd supplement. You'd run into a couple of people that played in the area, and then all of a sudden we found out it was evil, and holy crap, it was everywhere overnight. Like, I distinctly remember that. I remember, like, you'd have to scramble to find anything anywhere. You might go to the bookstore or the game store, and they'd have like a pack of miniatures or a pack of dice. And then overnight you'd go to the Eaton Center at Yorkdale, and they had a little kind of like circular kiosk in the center of the store that would be 20 people deep, all trying to get in and get stuff. And it was like, holy smokes.
Yeah.
Hey buddy, want to buy a D20? Open up the trench coat, there goes.
Yep, there you go.
Man, you got a D8, man? I need a D8. I'm shaking, man. Just one D8, okay? Just one.
Just one, man.
Just roll it for me, man. I won't even touch it. Just roll it.
Just roll it.
Yeah, no, you're right. There was some lean years where people were just hungry for it. I mean, they showed it, I guess, on the '70s show. They had them playing D&D. There's a lot of shows that had them doing it because it was just such a big craze. It was like the #1 game. I remember when it like usurped Monopoly as the most popular board game, and people were just like, that was a huge story at that point.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, that kind of came later. That's sort of getting more.
That's in the 80s.
Yeah, or 79, 80. It's just getting into the 80s.
Yeah, because, that was the peak of D&D, really, was, the around 1980, basically.
Yep.
And I'd say that it's not a coincidence, right? D&D arrived at the same time as Star Wars, video games, tentpole movies. That was, like, the great era of nerddom. The first great era of nerddom, anyway, I'd say.
Yeah.
Well, I'm noticing that the Dungeons and Dragons box set that they talk about, the basic box set, was released by different authors at various times, so everybody had a chance to sort of mess with it. Because there was the the 77 version, which was J. Eric Holmes,
Yeah.
the 81 version, which was Tom Maldvay, and the 83 version, which was Frank Metzer, which I remember, and then Troy Denning apparently did a 91 version. So even as late as 91, they were releasing a basic Dungeons and Dragons box set.
Yeah, well, those are the edits. I think the 91 one was the Rules Cyclopedia, which was all 5 versions in one big ass book.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, because there's always been a lot of dispute over who invented what. Like,
right.
Gygax is credited with it, but again, if you get a chance to see the white box, you can see that with Blackmoor, the Dave Arneson there. He did add a lot to it. He added a lot of stuff that didn't come back as well because the Blackmoor version uses hit locations.
Right.
And oh my god, are you fragile? like that was one of the things, and this kind of gets to what Jack was talking about with AD&D. The game, it's more game than story or real life, because once you get around 3rd or 4th level, you can take like 8-9 arrow hits and your guy doesn't go down, and that's not realistic. But when you look at a lot of like the high fantasy net, that's the kind of thing you'd see, like the popular image of Conan with his torn chainmail, like at 3 arrows in his shoulder and stuff. The Blackmoor version, Dave Arneson wanted it to be more realistic. So you had your hit point total like normal, but your different locations each had a hit point total of their own that was based on your overall. And your head would have like 10%. So if you had 50 hit points, which is really good, that you're talking to getting around like 10th level to get that many, your head takes 5 points of damage and then you die.
Just for those people who've never played D&D, we used to point out that the first level wizard had less hit points and was more easily killed by a common ground squirrel than anything else.
Yeah.
So that was I think that's part of the excitement playing D&D is the earlier levels, because you were so fragile.
Yeah.
Once you start getting up to levels 10, 12 and stuff like that, they really have to ramp up the monsters to make it anywhere near as dangerous. And it's that danger. It's that oh my god, this character I invested so much time into could get killed and removed from the game. That's where the excitement sort of goes, and that's why so many games sort of taper off after a while. You get to a point where you have like, we're not going to be able to beat this monster unless we have like a +6 holy sword. Just a second, let me go through my backpack here. My portable hole. I have 4 of them, 1 in each pocket. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny actually how early D&D was like actually going back to the video games of the time. Like the video games of that time, like what I'm talking of course about, Space Invaders, later on Galaga, all that Defender, all that stuff. They were damn hard. Like they were much harder than the games that people play today. You needed real skill and it took real effort, and if you actually got a high score, that really meant something back in those days. That's why a high score was a big deal.
Right.
That's why you got to go watch the documentary King of Kong. That'll get it to you. You ever seen that?
No, I haven't. Yeah. I should look that one up.
Totally great documentary about the guy who wants to beat the world record of Donkey Kong.
Right.
And it's a real dramatic thing too, because the guy who actually has the record is a real jerk, or at least he's painted that way in the documentary. You never really know, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But it's just it's classic. It's beautiful. It's a really funny documentary. Check it out.
I've taken a note. I will go check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes if I can find it. But
hyperlink.
Exactly. Hyperlink here. All right. So, but the game, I find that interesting though, that early D&D, part of the fun of it was there was that real challenge. Like I remember actually rolling up a wizard character that had 1 hit point. That's seriously 1 hit point. If anything happened to that character, and he had 1 hit point and 2 spells that he could use once a day.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you spend 8 hours a day trying to get those spells back.
Exactly.
See, I wouldn't have let you run off with a character like that. I was a pretty easier D&D guy. For the first level characters, I probably wouldn't have let somebody go with at least half the possibilities of your hit points that you could get. You know, I think the smallest I've let a wizard go is like 2, but he had a constitution of 16, so he had an extra +2, which gave him 4. Because that, I mean, seriously, the odd dart or an ill wind from the south could kill you. It's not.
Yeah, basically. But if you managed to live, damn, did you have like bragging rights?
Oh, for sure.
And that's the point.
Well, because you guys have kind of hit on 2 interesting points for gaming in general.
Mm-hmm.
And the one is that feel that you're talking about of achieving that comes from the idea that D&D came directly from tabletop wargaming.
Mm-hmm.
Where that piece on the table, that is not Grognar of the town of Feeblebeeble. That's asshole number 1 with spear, and his job is to go out there and die. Like, when you read, say, the white box D&D, they're recommending groups of 20. And it's because it's a meat grinder. And that was why basic D&D was levels 1 to 3, because it wasn't until you got to like level 4 that you could really take more than 1 or 2 hits.
Right. And I think a lot of people did actually run with, they would have, each person would have like 2 or 3 characters.
Oh yeah.
And then you'd basically, and then if any of them managed to get to level 2 or 3 and get some start to build up hits, that was awesome. That was your character.
Yep.
Well, I mean, yeah, they said many of the modules that you would buy, they'd say, must be so, first of all, they'd say like so many different characters of this level, and then eventually they would say things like, characters that equal this amount of total levels together,
right?
Kind of thing.
Yeah, that came.
So you could have a variety more that way.
Yeah, because that came later. The original ones would, and if you look at it, if you're a newer player of a later version, this is absolutely horrifying. But it would say for 8 to 12 characters levels, 5 to 7. But it's that idea that you'd be going in with an army, because remember those 8 characters all probably have 3 or 4 hirelings with them.
Wow.
So and this is the assumption that you're going in with an army, because it comes from that wargame thing. But you guys are now getting at the second important point that happens to gaming in general, where going into the early 80s, getting to the mid 80s, something that all versions of D&D kind of fumbled with was this idea that gaming was shifting away from the militant wargame thing, and people were getting attached to a character.
Right.
And the character aspect of it was more important in playing a character and keeping them around enough to get some story for this guy.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and you started to see gaming's going a little bit where it wouldn't be as fatal. That a brand new character wasn't like, achoo, oh my god, half the group is dead, And it was that shifting of attitude towards earlier versions of D&D, and the way a lot of people play when they first start is that character is your interface with the world, and the game isn't about you playing Ragnar the Mighty, it's you solving the adventure.
Right, yeah.
The character isn't really assumed to be a separate entity, but that kind of started by the mid-80s, and again, like Rob was saying, at that point you were getting more choices in the type of game, so story was getting to be more important.
Well, by the second edition, they were already identifying various styles of campaigns, and that's where you get the name the Monty Hall campaign, where you're just there to get a ton of stuff, and then there's the role playing, and then there's the political action. I have friends of mine that play D&D, and literally they're there for the conversation between characters. I'm like, are we gonna kill something anytime soon? They'll have this conversation with the bartender for like 4 hours, and I'm falling asleep going, okay, I don't drink, but I'm ready to. So everybody had their own version. But that came out of that first couple of years of the basic and stuff like that, sort of saying, well, what do these campaigns look like? What's the flavor of them? Because I don't want to say genre. It's not even really a genre. It's just the flavor of what they are.
Yeah.
Right. And remember, of course, at this point, the setting itself was generic, so everybody's campaign had their own flavor. Like, everybody would have their own house rules, everyone would modify the hell out of the game. I mean, I don't even think that many people actually ever even used hirelings, as Don just referred to. I mean, I don't think I ever played in a role-playing game where we were allowed to have hirelings or NPCs working for us, ever.
I got them. Well, if you remember, when you got to level 9, I think it's like level 9 as a fighter, you were supposed to attract a whole bunch of henchmen.
Oh, those aren't technically. They're not. When you got to name level, which was usually level like 9 or 10, you got followers.
Yeah,
followers are different because followers were you'd get tons. Hirelings were, if you remember your charisma stat, you had like a maximum number.
Sure.
And they were like your henchmen, hirelings and henchmen. And then
that's right, yeah.
And then there were also, I forget the technical term, but you could hire like dickweeds, which would be like guys to carry stuff.
Yeah.
And you had no limit to them, but they weren't going to really help you out when the orcs attacked.
Right.
Right.
And it was all very structured because again, that comes from the wargame thing.
Right. Now, I think I remember you telling me, Don, now this is something I never came across, but that in D&D, or at least some versions of it, there was actually a setup where your character could eventually retire and become the lord of a land or something like that. Is that true?
That they all assumed that. The red box one, AD&D, yeah, and that was at name level. That was one of the abilities you got, is you could build a stronghold and you'd have your followers.
And even as a priest or a cleric, there was assumed that so much of your money would go towards building your next monastery or something like that. You would set that up as well for those reasons. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was because again, it goes back to that wargame idea that was when your character is powerful enough, you'd establish your own kingdom.
Right. Actually, I think that's good though. I mean, because later on, at least the games I was involved with, and maybe this is a game because I wasn't playing D&D in the early days or such, but a lot of role-playing games tend to lack an end game. Like the only end game is whatever, defeating the bad guy to this particular scenario or to this module situation, whatever. But they don't really have an end game to actually have your character kind of look forward to or work towards. But the idea that your character could eventually become like the lord of a land or something like that, and that was an actual thing your character could be working towards, to me brings that character to life, actually. It actually adds something else to the game that I think a lot of games miss.
It does, and it hits at something that you kind of lose with modern versions of like D&D, was that D&D was meant to be a very long-term hobby.
Right.
And that was why in your earliest versions, level progression is really slow, partly because you're going to lose characters left and right, and partly because of the expense and the way you earned experience. And AD&D, one of the rules that's in the book nobody ever used was finding a teacher.
Okay.
Right.
So if I wanted to go to 9th level, I had to find a guy who was 10th level to teach me, and there just weren't that many of them.
Yeah, that was a huge thing, too, that we just sort of gave up on as well. Yeah, I remember that, too.
But it was because...
Or you were in a town, and it just so happened that in that town you could find somebody, fast forward to the next adventure.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, right? I mean, it would get in the way of doing the adventure stuff. I mean, you can't have the players all going off looking for teachers and all on these separate journeys. That's just going to fragment the group and make it very difficult to GM and play.
Well, the idea was you'd have cities that would have that, and that would be something known ahead of time. And then when the characters evolved to the point that they became rulers of a kingdom, typically that character would retire, and then you start another campaign. But then, Ragnar the Mighty 12th level fighter would always be at that kingdom, and it became... The game was more about the world than it was the characters.
I see. So you were literally creating generations of characters that would eventually evolve to non-player status, basically, or become the elite of the kingdom, and you would then move on to role-playing the next generation, basically.
Yeah, and it was generally, this is why if you look at, say, your old school AD&D, and AD&D for the longest time was Dungeons and Dragons. That's what everybody thought of. There are no 11th level monsters, because it was assumed that 10th level you would establish yourself, you'd retire, the next bunch would come in. Like that was the way that the game was designed. But what ended up happening was, again, it's this shift towards more character-oriented stuff. You would have people who would want, well, okay, my guy's the king, let's play king stuff. And when they brought out the companion rules and master rules for D&D, that's what that was all about.
Right.
That you then had if you remember the game, you had turns, rounds. You then had like kingdom turns that I believe were like 3 months, and you check for what happened during that 3-month period, and there'd be modifiers based on how much taxes you were charging and how well your kingdom was doing, and you could play out that bigger kind of picture.
That's the kind of stuff that was in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, right?
Nope, the Dungeon Master's Guide never quite made that leap to running kingdoms. Again, it was assumed once you built your stronghold, you were done. That was the D&D, the red box, basic expert one that did that.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, it didn't get till 2nd edition that they started to specialize. There's actually a Strongholds... there's a Strongholds campaign that I have, and there's also like a Catacombs and Castles... no, I think it's Castles and Catacombs are 2 different ones that I've got as well that come in. So Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, as far as I remember, there really was like initially only 5 sort of source books, I guess, and they didn't start off initially. They start off with the Player's Handbook, and they had the the Dungeon Master's Guide first.
No, actually, it was Monster Manual.
Okay, the Monster Manual, because I got that as well. The Monster Manual, and then there was Monster Manual 2, and then there's the Fiend Folio as well.
Yep.
And then there was a bunch of modules, and then they often had anything they wanted to add in came through the Dragon Magazine, and eventually the Dragon Magazine and Dungeon Magazine split off, and many of the campaign stuff they did in Dragon was in Dungeon, and then Dragon just kept up with like new character classes and new spells and all that kind of stuff. Did they have the second spells book out? No, that was 2nd edition.
Yep, because what ends up happening near the end of AD&D, there's what ends up happening that changes stuff that I think leads into 2nd edition was Dragonlance.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Dragonlance adventures were really important because in a lot of ways they were the first narrativist role-playing games.
Right.
Okay, how so?
Well, they were really weird because it was an interesting idea, but if you were a proper AD&D player, they were useless because you played the established characters, you played the established story, nothing you did really mattered.
Oh.
Like if you're playing like Riverwind is not going to die in the first adventure because there's stuff that comes up later on that they have to be there for.
Right.
And again, it was AD&D bumping up against the new kind of gaming, which again was more character, more story oriented, which AD&D was just not equipped to deal with.
Right.
Right. Now, and that's the Greyhawk. So you start seeing Greyhawk world stuff everywhere, source campaign stuff and campaign stuff. Now, when they came out with all of the Greyhawk, is that when they came out with the Forgotten Realms as well at the same time?
Nope.
I remember them both sort of coming up against each other as if you want to play 2 established realms, you could play Ed Greenwood's Forgotten Realms, or you could play Dragonlance, right? So.
Yeah. Well, what ended up? Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was going to comment. You're referring to Greyhawk, but Greyhawk came much earlier. I think you don't mean Greyhawk.
Yeah.
You mean Dragonlance, right?
Isn't Greyhawk and Dragonlance the same? Because I didn't collect either one of them for the same reason.
No, they're different.
Okay.
Oh, okay. What's the world? It's Kryn, isn't it?
Yep. That's where Dragonlance takes place.
That's right. Yeah, my mistake. Sorry.
Yeah, and Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance should be contemporaries to each other.
Yeah.
Right.
But Greyhawk was like original D&D.
Yeah, that was
like the first D&D
right.
setting.
Yeah, it was
the first D&D setting. Because I always customized. I always had my own world, the Land of Terra, Tehra. And I had 7 continents and the whole bit. So I would only use those campaigns to further feed my own world.
Yeah,
right.
I'd modify them whatever way. I'm sure lots of other people did the same thing. So.
Yeah, naturally.
They did too, and the thing with that too is when Greyhawk was like the first supplement for white box D&D, and it became the default setting for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But when it came out, it was a really threadbare setting,
right?
Because it was again still assumed that you would take whatever came out and fit it to your own personal campaign.
Right.
Yeah, it was sort of like little areas. Like, here's this campaign thing, but there was no overarching kind of world. All the monsters were stock monsters, right?
Well, they added, because there's the original AD&D Greyhawk supplement is a map and some really vague descriptions of the kingdoms.
Right.
And then the published modules were all fit into that world.
Cool.
Like the earliest ones. But again, it wasn't something, because the story wasn't real important at that point.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Forgotten Realms was kind of more of a fleshed out setting, but it wasn't until you got like the Dragonlance that the story based, the narrative based thing became a thing. And
Meanwhile, it was what year would that have been?
for which, Dragonlance?
Yeah, for the Dragonlance stuff.
Was
that early 80s?
Yeah, it's like 84, 85, I want to say.
Because the movies, I'm sure, like, reflected this. Because, like, you had Mazes and Monsters in, like, 82, where they're talking about the negative style of stuff. And then we had Hawk the Slayer, which was, like...
Yep.
He was, like, 80, or was it... Yeah, 1980 was Hawk the Slayer. And I remember playing D&D and watching Hawk the Slayer going, I need to go play more D&D.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why don't I have a crossbow, or was it a crossbow that fires like 15,000 rounds at once? That was like so cool. No,
that was awesome.
Yeah, that was awesome stuff. And why didn't they ever come out with a sequel? Anyway,
they tried several times, but they just didn't pull it off.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't. So it's hyperlinked back to an earlier episode. So sorry, I didn't get off. But I just wanted to point out that people recognize this, and we started seeing fantasy movies in ways that we hadn't seen, before, right? There was a ton of them that came out at this time. You had The Sword and the Sorceress in 84.
Yeah.
I've never seen Barbarians.
Really?
Any good? 87, yeah.
No, it was terrible, but it's a lot of fun.
I'm sure. War, Hunter from the Future, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, and Beastmaster.
Yep.
Deathstalker.
Those, right? Deathstalker, yeah. Krull, which was a little more sci-fi, but still, it had a lot of the fantasy aspects in it. So that's all like early '80s stuff, right?
And
so
it's all D&D. Like, I don't think it's necessarily directly inspired by D&D, but it's that Lord of the Rings, big giant quest, encounter, final boss. That sort of mentality permeated Sword and Sorcery in the day, and then, like I said, that was the D&D thing. That was the irony being.
I was just going to say, this is what I was thinking when I was thinking about this show tonight. I was thinking, well, Lord of the Rings is the catalyst, and no one can argue that they're not, like, it's not the grandfather of fantasy when it comes to novels.
Right.
I would say D&D is the real grandfather for most of the fantasy stuff that we see in media stuff, including movies and things, and video games, like Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale and Diablo and all that kind of stuff. That comes from D&D more than it comes directly from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
I would agree.
I would totally agree, yeah.
D&D was much more of an influence about a lot of fantasy and what we think about fantasy than Lord of the Rings was. And keep in mind, those who are younger than us, that the novels were very popular. People. How can I put this? Tolkien wasn't a true mega bit of pop culture until the movies came out in like the 2000s.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
it was more people who were readers and academics that really liked Tolkien and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's true.
In the 70s and after, prior to that, nobody liked Tolkien.
Yeah.
There's
like this is where our hope comes from, gentlemen, is that nobody listens to our shows now, but 40 years from now we're all going to be geniuses. It's like, oh my God, is there another episode of that DNA show? Those guys were brilliant.
Yeah, well, we'll all be dead by then. But anyway.
Yeah.
Woohoo! So
that's the way that kind of stuff works.
But
always the optimist.
I try.
But it's interesting that you mention all of this stuff, because that's what leads into second edition D&D.
Right.
Was
well, because okay, continue, Don. Sorry.
Oh, because I was going to say, the AD&D, the D&D couldn't handle a lot of the character stuff. Because, again, the mechanics were very functional.
Mm-hmm.
It was very goal-oriented. It was very defeat the villain, defuse the trap, blah, blah, blah. Second edition kind of tried to fix that, because that was where you had like character packages where you could totally customize. You weren't just a fighter, D10 hit dice. You were a fighter, you could pick and choose abilities, stuff like that.
Well, that's where they brought out the supplements on kits, which I have every one of them. I'm looking at them right now, the brown and the blue and the green. Yeah, they had all these great kits, and the kits weren't just like the fighter's kit, which they brought out all the great proficiency stuff and specialization stuff. And the wizard's one that gave you all the ability to be able to like specialize in certain schools of magic and really look into that. But they also had some really cool kits on races, like the dwarven race one and the gnomish one and the humanoids one is a great character kit, because suddenly it means you're not just stuck to those particular races, but you could actually create like a kobold character or a half ogre character, or something like that you could be able to play not on a regular basis, but as something different within the campaign. Second edition was my favorite. I'm just going to say that right now. I kind of stopped there.
Okay.
I was thinking the argument is just for the same reason why I don't go to Beauty and the Beast in the movies. If I find something that that works for me, why would I spend all this money amassing this great list and I modify it all anyway?
Right.
Why would I go and rebuy everything all over again for 3 more issues? Even I've played them in different places.
Right.
They're okay. But I don't get any more enjoyment or any more role play out of 3, 4. Now I haven't played 5 yet, and I hear that it's really good. But I haven't got any better role playing experience out of that. So.
Right. That's fair enough. Although, Jack, I got to ask, when was the last time you actually got to play second edition D&D?
A couple of months ago.
Oh, that's right.
I play with my sons.
Yep.
And in fact, they really enjoy it too. I'm on my birthday. My son, I told you this, didn't I?
I think you did.
On my birthday, I was having a nap, and I came out, and my son had darkened everything and put up like these blankets and had a candle on the table and had started the campaign, and he had made me a character and the whole bit. It was my birthday, and so then as we continued the story. My younger son, who was in his room, was called out, and he brought out a character. So when I met him, he came. And he actually had a friend over sitting in his bedroom for like 3 hours waiting for us to meet that character. And he just sat there and read books or whatever. So he came out. Suddenly I had a whole party, and I had no idea. It was a really awesome, one of my favorite D&D experiences.
Wow.
Just a couple months ago. So that was pretty cool.
No, you didn't tell me about that one, but that's fantastic. Congratulations. You raised them right.
Yeah, exactly. There's a whole bunch of DNA people going, "Oh my god, that's the best dad ever."
Yeah, that's right, because they got into it because of Stranger Things, didn't they?
Yeah, to be honest, I played with them before and they enjoyed it, but when they watched Stranger Things again, they were like, can we borrow your books, Dad? Because they wanted to get into it. So they got into it themselves. Now, to be fair, my 16-year-old, every Sunday night he goes and plays at his friend's place. So they've been doing a campaign now for about 1.5 years, 2 years.
Wow.
So.
That's good.
So that's pretty cool. Yeah, pretty cool.
Okay, that's well, the next generation is being raised right. It's good to hear that. Okay, so I'm glad to hear that your second edition books are still getting a workout. That's good to hear.
Well, not more than that. I look through them on a regular basis because it gives me inspiration as a writer, and I think that's one of the things. In the end, we'll talk about that. But I think you'll find some of the best writers that we respect nowadays started off playing Dungeons and Dragons, and you really get. And other role-playing, of course, but you really get a real sense for pacing, a real sense for drama, a sense for voice and character and dialogue, and all these aspects that are key to telling a good story. A lot of that comes through playing Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games.
Yep, I definitely believe that.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much every writer of our generation, almost not every, but the majority of them, I'm willing to bet, were gamers and often dungeon masters. or game masters, whatever.
Yeah, I could see that.
Well, I was surprised. I actually got like 12 famous people who play D&D up, and you've heard of most of them, I'm sure, like the Vin Diesels,
Yeah.
right?
Right, yeah.
And Stephen Colbert is very famous, and Kevin Smith, and of course Felicia Day. But I didn't know, and Will Wheaton.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know Stephen King was a player.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
And I didn't know that Joss Whedon was a player.
That
That
doesn't
one should-
surprise me.
That should be obvious.
Yeah, it should be obvious, but he had to give it up after university. But he was a huge player in university because he was just too busy for that. I also didn't know that Jon Favreau was. So he says it gave me a really strong background in imaginative storytelling. But if you know that he did like Zathura, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yep, Favreau makes perfect sense. Yeah, well, here, even if you see him, I mean, he's the guy who plays Happy Hogan in the Iron Man movies as well. That's which he directed the first one. And if you look at Jon Favreau, you look at him and go, yeah, that's a gamer.
Right. For
He
sure.
he does. He looks like he walked out of someone's gaming group.
Yeah. But Dwayne Johnson does not.
Yeah.
And he is a gamer as well, right?
Really? I knew
The
Vin
Rock-
Diesel, but not Dwayne Johnson.
Oh,
Wow.
The Rock is very much a gamer. He apparently tried D&D on several. Oh, sorry. He has played it several occasions, but he prefers board games over role playing.
Okay.
Probably doesn't have enough character.
Right. Well, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Now, of course, Robin Williams was as well.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Robin Williams was
There's
a
a
gamer.
couple. There's a couple of sports guys here that I don't know. Tim Duncan, 15-time NBA All-Star, is one of them, as well as Kurt Schilling from World Series champion. So any of our DNA people out there who are sports nerds, you'll go, oh my God, really?
Both of you.
I've heard those names, but I don't actually know them. I'm not a sports guy, obviously.
Yeah. But since we're talking about, the effect on culture that happened, you have to mention the Dungeons and Dragons television show that come on around this time because it's hitting 83 to 85, right? The animated show.
Yeah.
We look at it and we go, it's awful now. But when we were kids watching it, it really was one of those things that amped up wanting to play D&D more.
No, I still thought it was terrible.
Me too.
So only half the group has weapons and there's no cleric? What the hell? That's...
Yeah, that was... And of course, you heard our interview with Will Mineo where he talked about how that was never supposed to be a D&D TV show to begin with. They just grabbed the name at the last minute.
That was an amazing interview. Sorry, once again, hyperlink. I'm going to make this an audio hyperlink show. I will come up with the audio hyperlink the technology at some point.
Right. Yep. Okay, there we go. I wish we could just say hyperlink and one would automatically appear. That would be so awesome. Oh, I'd love that so much. Oh, save so much time in post. But yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, no, that was a great interview. We really enjoyed it.
Right.
Will was a great, fantastic guest. And but yeah, so that's the thing, right? I mean, if we'd gotten something that was closer to D&D, like, say, the Japanese anime version, which was Record of Lodoss War, then we would have been crazy for it. But
I don't even know what that is.
No.
Record of Lodoss War...
Never heard of that. You'll have to send me a link.
Okay, I will. For those who are not familiar, and I suspect our anime watchers are. Record of Lodoss War... Okay, so D&D hit Japan as well. The Japanese actually did get into it as well, just like we did. And so as an end result, they had, especially in the 80s and such, they had their own role-playing boom that happened. And one of these guys basically kept records of all his role-playing campaigns. He turned his role-playing campaign into a series of novels, and then they got animated. And originally into an OAV series and later into a TV series. Yeah. And OAV means, they were direct-to-video, basically. They were animated, but they were direct-to-video. That's what OAV means.
Yeah.
Okay, but did they have Donnie Most playing one of the voices? Because good old Ralph Mouth from Happy Days played Eric the Cavalier. Let's not forget that.
Well,
actually, Frank Welker had some extra voices. I recognize Frank Welker's voice.
Oh, I'm sure. All the classic guys were doing that. Remember, that was, I think, a Marvel Sunbow production at that point. And so all their standard guys were in there somewhere. I'm sure that Megatron was in there somewhere as well. And Peter, that was Frank Welker. Peter Cullen as Optimus Prime was probably in there voicing some knight or something like that, I'm sure. The usual, but anyway, no. Record of Lotus War. It's D&D. Like my God, it's the most D&D thing ever.
Oh my God, you know who Peter Cullen is?
Who?
Venger.
Oh, that makes sense.
Of course.
He's the main bad guy, of course. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just noticed that when I looked at the IMDb. I had to spread that out. Sorry about that.
No. And I will link to Record of Lotus War when I get when I do the chance. Because it is. It's the most D&D thing ever. In fact, it was one of the things that seeing actually helped get me towards fantasy back when it came out when I was in like beginning university. And I remember seeing that thing and going, "Wow, this is so cool! Hey, wait, this is D&D." And that was it for me. That's when I took an interest in fantasy.
Awesome.
Well, one of the things actually. I mean, I also read Terry Brooks's Shannara novels back when I was in high school, and that made me more pro fantasy at that point.
Well, the thing is, he argues that his Shannara novels aren't based on Lord of the Rings. You know what they're based on?
What?
On Three Musketeers.
That's what he says. I'm not buying it. Well, it's just, remember, he's just defensive of being called a Tolkien ripoff for the last, 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm not buying it. I mean, I tried rereading The Elfstones, which is my favorite, a couple years back, and it's like, wow, this is D&D, wow, this is Tolkien again. It very much is.
Right.
Actually, Shannara just got turned into a TV series.
Yes, I hear it's terrible, but I don't know.
Apparently, they're doing a second season, so it must have done okay. They're filming second season right now.
I haven't seen it, but I just saw somebody on Facebook say they watched Shannara, and then there was a whole bunch of condolences. It was like somebody died. Just like all in the comments. It's like, oh, do you need help? Did somebody hurt you? You know,
well, it was done for...
that kind of like really bad sort of things.
Well, two things. One, it's based on the second book, The Elfstones, which was the better of the three books, I'd say. I read all three. And also, it was done for MTV, so I have to wonder if MTV didn't want them to kind of youth it up a little bit or something, so I don't know.
Yeah.
When it came out...
We're getting Dragon Riders of Pern, for crying out loud, and that's entirely D&D style too, right? So
very true.
Yeah.
That's a series coming out too. Everybody's going fantasy now that we've had Game of Thrones really successful. Right?
Yeah, and Game of Thrones is leaving, so they're hoping to replace it with something.
And it's the 80s again, so that's the big fantasy boom.
All right, so let's continue because we don't want to get too far off track because the three of us could literally be at this for 4 hours. Okay, so let's move.
That's pretty economical of you to say 4 hours.
I know. This is going to be a multi-night event if we don't tone it down here a little bit. All right, so why don't we go with this? So second edition comes out.
Yep.
And Jack loved second edition. Second edition was much more character focused, as Don said, and it allowed a lot more options. I remember the books that came out, were basically, here's like a zillion like sub character classes for this type of thing. There was like the Ranger book, and here's like 60 types of Rangers. Yeah. And here's like the Wizards book, and here's like 100 types of Wizards. And that's kind of what it was. And I remember also they did the thing where they had the monster manual binders. So you could actually, and you could buy like the inserts. So it wasn't actually that you just put in the binder. That's how you added to your collection.
Yeah.
Yep. And I didn't think that worked very well, but I did have them. I do have them. And they also had like the spell cards too. Do you remember those?
Oh yeah. Spellfire, isn't it?
You could have these spell cards, which were all the basic spells, and they had all the stuff, so you could have them almost like a playing deck of cards. This is way before Magic days.
Yeah.
Yep, that's before Magic, because this is around 91 we're talking here at this point. Because it was early 90s.
Late 80s, early 90s.
I would say it's still late 80s, honestly.
Yeah, second edition is 89.
Is it?
The official 89, and the D&D Rules Cyclopedia is 91, which I still consider basically second edition.
Right.
What the Rules Cyclopedia is basic, expert, all that.
Oh, it is? Okay.
It's just a reprint of those.
Okay, then never mind. I'm off on that one. But anyway, second edition starts in 89, and it basically people played it throughout the 90s because third edition doesn't come until 2000.
Let's also not forget that they had a ton of different worlds in the second edition that they brought out beyond the stuff. And they tried various different times, like Al Qadim, which I have, right, which is sort of like their Sinbad kind of storyline that they had.
Yep.
and then there was Dark Sun.
Yep.
And then there's Hollow World.
Yep.
And then of course there's the space one, which was what's it called?
Starjammers.
Starjammers, right? So there's just an explosion in second edition of creativity from all. You could play D&D in almost every kind of way that you want. Oh, and Ravenloft. Let's not forget Ravenloft, right?
And
which
Red
a lot
Death.
of people loved.
Yep.
And what?
Red Death.
Red Death.
Yeah.
I didn't know that one.
It came out near the end of second. It's the idea of all the different settings that they came out with in second was important too. Because you saw during the end of the AD&D run, they were looking to market it in other medium, like you said, the cartoon. There were the toys, the things, and to do that, you need recognizable characters. The Forgotten Realms Dragonlance were really, really popular. Second edition, they added a shitload. The Red Death was set more. It wasn't quite Victorian era, but it was that more like Gothic horror kind of setting. It was actually a few, say, a century or two ahead of the more medieval setting that D&D usually happened in.
Right. Okay.
Yep. I was just gonna say, and I have the Celtic campaign book, and I have the Age of Heroes, which is sort of like Greek times book. And so there's a whole bunch of ones which were just more setting and flavor rather than, a bunch of different monsters in the same, like it wasn't so much of a massive campaign per se, but it was just a way to say, okay, all the rules, here's a chance to try them different ways. And I was wondering if that in second edition they were also trying to combat the rise of things like GURPS, which was like universal, and they were trying to say, well, we could be more universal too.
Probably.
Yeah, because it was also that idea you had, this was also the time that you had, like, the White Wolf stuff coming out, and there were sort of two kind of conflicting groups in gaming. There were the people who wanted the fully detailed setting that you could totally immerse yourself in, and then the people that just kind of wanted a nudge because they wanted to come up with their own stuff.
Right.
And second edition kind of bridges that, because you would get, like, say, the Ravenloft setting, which is horror, and they'd give you some details, and there'd be a bunch of, like, supplements. But in true D&D fashion, you could still had a lot of room to play with.
Right.
Yeah. Like, this was also the time of the Known World, which was the Gazetteer series that they did for like, basic D&D. Because if you remember, basic D&D took place in Specularum.
Okay, yeah, jeez, I forgot about that. Yeah.
And they called that the Known World, and then they tried fleshing that out as a setting as well. And they did things with it, because they did supplements. There's one that's more like a Native American supplement.
Yep.
There's a more like the ancient Mongol supplement. There's the Orcs of Thar, which was like an orc like humanoid kingdom, and you could play in that kind of thing. And it was that idea of trying to expand the story of the game, because that was something that took off towards the end of the 80s.
And Advanced sort of expanded different worlds too, because you had Manual of the Planes, which I'm looking at right now, and Deities and Demigods came out then too, right? To add in all those extra rules, as well as, like, you could have a god that you could, and this is what your god would give you if you worship this particular god. So that's cool. Very cool.
And that was, they came up with the idea of the alternate material planes.
Right.
So Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms are happening at the same time, but in different dimensions.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yep.
That works. So they were trying that, and of course, I believe this is also the period, at least the 90s, was also the period when the bottom fell out and TSR collapsed.
Yeah.
I think that was this period, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was early.
Well, yeah, because Wizard of the Coast bought them up, right? And that's what saved them. And Wizard of the Coast wanted to buy them up specifically because they wanted to have more artwork and more name recognition. They wanted to be able to use some of the names that they had already sewn up in D&D.
Yeah, basically.
Because Magic the Gathering was really taking over. People were buying that instead of buying Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
That was probably closer to mid 90s, like
97,
94,
97,
97. Okay.
97.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Wizards of the Coast, which at that time wasn't, but now is a subsidiary of Hasbro.
Yep.
Wizards of the Coast had made a ton of money doing, of course, the World of Darkness stuff. TSR basically went bankrupt, if I remember right, because second edition did not work out that well for them. I'm not sure the whole story behind that, but it didn't, I remember. And so Wizards of the Coast bought them and did what they could with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Which eventually, of course, led to third edition in 2000.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk about third, or was there anything more to say about second?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, yeah, so, but once you get to 2000, then you have to mention the Dungeons & Dragons movie.
No, we don't.
No, we don't.
No, we don't.
That was terrible. I love how it's got 3.6 on the IMDb scale. Because it really, it highlighted for me the frustrating thing that I had as somebody who played D&D was, why couldn't we have a fantasy movie that took itself as seriously as we could take ourselves playing the game? And that didn't happen until Lord of the Rings, the movie. When you actually could take a look at Lord of the Rings movie and go, yeah, this is more like historical fiction. And I said that way back. I said, somebody has to do a fantasy game as if it's a historical fiction game, or a historical fiction movie, I should say, not a game, a fantasy movie and a historical fiction movie, so that people will take it more seriously, because they always wanted to make it cheesy somehow.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand why, because the audience had been so much more mature about this, right? We didn't want the cheesy anymore. We wanted something that took a look at it from a real serious perspective.
You mean Game of Thrones?
Well, that was even more serious. That wasn't until much later, of course, right? So
actually, no, he started writing those in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm thinking movies, though. I'm thinking
movies, that's
and
true.
television, like mass medium stuff. There's a ton of people who never read Game of Thrones when it came out. Take a look at the Red Wedding videos.
That's true. Oh, yeah, most people didn't read them. Yeah, there we go, hyperlink, yeah.
I'm going to sample that for you so you can just play it anytime. Hyperlink.
But name Game of Thrones came out in 96. So there we go.
There you go.
But and it was popular, but only among hardcore fantasy fans and geeks. They were the only ones who were really paying attention to it back then when it first came out.
For sure.
Because you've kind of hit at one of the problems that D&D has had almost since its conception, is that when it expanded out into mass marketing, nobody knew what to do with it. And that was one of the things, like, in the 80s, LJN did a line of action figures based on the books. And nobody cared, because the audience, it wasn't the kind of people that would want to, get out in the backyard and play at the action figure kind of thing. It was older people, or it was younger people who were, like you saying, they took the game serious.
Right.
And the irony to that was the LGN action figures, they were nice. They were really well done. Most of them were really accurate to the game.
What about the Ralpatha action figures? That's the ones I remember.
No, they did gaming miniatures. Those are the actual.
They did D&D ones too, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of companies did. No, I'm talking action figures, like Star Wars Kenner action figures.
Are you kidding me? Seriously?
Yeah. See, he didn't even know. Like they were.
I didn't even know that. No.
They were super not popular. And again, it was just an audience thing, because, like I said, the figures were beautiful. They were very well done. They look good. The characters showed up because Strongheart and Warduke were from the action figure line. Oh,
okay.
And some of those characters they did figures of show up later on in different things. Like I think Strongheart was actually in the cartoon at one point. And Warduke came back officially for, I know for 3rd edition, they did official stats for him, and I think 2nd had them too.
Wow. The name's familiar, but both the names are familiar, but I don't remember seeing them. I'll have to check them out.
There was a module for AD&D that they were both in. It was kind of like, I think it was more like a choose-your-own-adventure kind of thing.
Gotcha.
But it wasn't.
They had a couple of those solar adventure D&D campaign things. I have one or two of them as well.
Yeah.
Designed for people who just love to read the games and play themselves, right?
So, or didn't have friends.
Yeah. I mean, that wasn't me.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
I have maximum charisma.
That's right. And a million hit points. That's from The Simpsons.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't Ralph. It's the other kid who's really, really unpopular but very rich.
Oh, why can't I remember his name? The little brainiac kid.
Yeah, he has a swimming pool in one episode, right?
Yeah.
Everybody comes to a swimming pool. That's right. Yeah, the brainiac. Yeah, because there's that whole episode where he's in a dream and they have like sort of the Freddy Krueger style killings during one of the things, and he's like a wizard. Right?
Yeah, the Wizard of Conjugation.
That's right. Yes, you remember. So that was the third. So third edition came from Wizards of the Coast. Hasbro must have done the fourth edition then.
Yes.
Yep. Because third edition is kind of interesting, because I have to say I think overall that's my favorite.
Well, is it third or 3.5? Because they came in with 3.5 to fix or something all the stuff from 3, they said.
Well, that's what they said. They're not that different. They juggled some of the numbers. Because third edition was a big deal, and because its greatest achievement was also its greatest weakness. And that was the one where they did the open license, where anybody who wanted could do supplements for the game.
Right. That's when the die 20 system took over and swallowed up like the Borg every possible role-playing system.
Yes, it did.
Yep.
Everything was using die 20. Was there a reason behind that other than we want everybody to play?
Well, no, that was basically it. And it worked out great on the consumer end, because within that first year, everybody who could put out a supplement did. And there was a lot of neat stuff. They did a lot of like weird kind of derivations and weird settings and weird rules. And they detailed everything out, and it was fantastic. It was beautiful. But by the end of that first year, anything you could think of, somebody already put out.
Right, yeah, pretty much.
And I always had the sneaking suspicion that 3.5 was kind of just a way of getting people to rebuy a bunch of stuff, because there was literally nothing more you could write.
Yeah.
Right.
Because everybody and their brother knew that putting out a D&D supplement was almost printing money at that point for a little while there. So everyone did.
Yeah. And then what ended up happening too is people pushed it, and they would use the D20 system for non-sword and sorcery games.
Oh, there were a lot of those.
Yeah, there were. And that was where...
Well, they would also recast stuff like Star Wars came back as a D20. You know? And I like the D6 system better, actually. The D6 system that Star Wars came, there's an actual, and if you ever find it in a secondhand place, either one of you, I charge thee to pick it up for me, because I don't have it. But the original D6 source book of how to use that D6 was a great kind of GURPS style, not GURPS itself, but GURPS style system where you could use for everything. And it was just really cool. And so I was kind of annoyed that a really decent system, that like a D6 system for Star Wars, was totally taken over and made for a D20, but that's because I hadn't bought into all the D20 stuff from version 3.
Yeah.
So.
The only thing I didn't like about it, and it probably because I'm an old school gamer, was the idea that a D20 campaign is finite.
Right.
Because the way progression works, you're only going to be playing like, say, 20 or 30 games, and then the character's going to be like 20th level, and it's probably time to retire.
Your characters go up really fast in D20, is what you're saying.
Well, fast compared to the old... Like, I'm used to the old school AD&D, where you could play for like 4 years, and, oh man, we made it to 7th level kind of thing.
Right.
Like this one, it does... I can kind of see the advantage to the company, though, because what that lets you do is, that's probably about a year of gaming. And then you've played through your whole thing, and then you can pick up one of the other settings or one of the other variants, and then you can start your whole new campaign clean. You've wrapped up the old one pretty neatly. It's kind of a way to kind of keep the products moving.
Right.
Like, that was the thing they started with second, the idea of putting more focus on the campaign setting. And then third edition really took off with that.
Cool. So then why fourth?
I think what happened with fourth, because a lot of most people did not care for fourth at all.
Right.
Right.
And I think what ended up happening was you got 3rd edition comes out, there's a new boom in gaming. By like the mid 2000s, it's starting to die off. They're looking to revamp gaming, especially big gaming, because this is a huge company. They're Hasbro now. They're gigantic. The smaller companies for gaming are doing pretty good, because if we sell 2,000 books, you know, that's a hit for us.
Right.
Because 4th edition and what people didn't care for so much about it, it played kind of more like a video game.
Right, that's what I heard.
Yeah, that's which is because when it came out in 2008, just for reference, it basically was the peak of World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
World of Warcraft, and when World of Warcraft at that point was like the biggest thing ever and was making literally tens of, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars at that point.
Yeah.
Is it still making money, or is it...
Oh, it's still making money, just not that much.
Oh, yeah.
Not as many people in the same way. It's
people
more
don't play
diehards that are on there.
Yeah, so many
this is the
competitors
time too. My friend, like I have a good friend from school, Brian Welcher, and he's played D&D and a lot of other stuff. He's been playing. He's probably in his. Let me think. He's probably like 40, 41, 42. He's been playing Dungeons and Dragons and or other role playing games every single Sunday afternoon since he was in high school.
Wow.
With the same group of guys, 7-8 guys that come in and play. And so every Sunday, that is his thing. He doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't do anything else. That's his thing. They all get down and they play. And often they'll come in the morning and they'll play like Magic the Gathering. And then they'll play all afternoon or midday, all afternoon. And then in evening, they'll go back to their own homes and then they'll play online on a video game online kind of thing of some sort. So they're like hardcore.
Yeah.
So he jumped he jumped to Pathfinder.
Yep.
Which he said was sort of like going backwards to more what D&D was. And he became like he makes a fair amount of cash as somebody who's got like 4 degrees in the teaching profession, and his wife is the same way. He gets a brand new Pathfinder campaign like every week or every month.
Right.
And he's got so many that he said that if he just retired right now and they played constantly like every week, he would still never be able to finish them all.
Wow.
So he doesn't make up his own. He just plays what they give them, and they have a rule that if they die in one of the campaigns, they put that campaign away and they never play it again.
Wow.
So it's sort of like, if we didn't do it, time to play another game.
Right.
So that's pretty hardcore. So
that's hardcore.
I give full props for that. So is Pathfinder like 3 then?
Yeah, What happened was, and this kind of ties in with something that came up a little earlier too. Pathfinder's version 3.5, like, period. It juggles numbers and that, because what happened was everybody loved 3 and 3.5. Everybody hated 4. Pathfinder started, they did supplements and campaigns for 3rd edition. And when 4th came out, they just said, well, we'll just pick up the 3rd edition slack. And they did their own tweaked version of it. And yeah, they just kept going.
Except Pathfinder is not by Wizards of the Coast, if I remember right.
No, it's not.
It's actually, they basically, another company basically said, well, you're not doing anything with this. Can we get, get the rights from you? At least borrow the rights, whatever, license the rights. And Wizards of the Coast is like, okay, sure, more money for us, go ahead.
Yeah, because it's
that's right.
It's basically still the open gaming thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's still D20. So, but they don't use the same names. They must have different names and such for character classes and everything.
Well,
no.
It's the same. They have different stuff because they have their own settings. What Pathfinder started as in Polyhedron, they would run these epic campaigns that would take your character from 1st level to 20th level.
I was the original subscriber of the first Polyhedrons, by the way.
Yeah, these are
cool.
These are the D3 ones.
The magazines, yeah, that came. They used to come with the Dragon magazines at first.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Just like little pamphlets is what they were.
Well, they were
little white pamphlets. That's all they were.
Yeah, because
it was like a fanzine, for crying out loud. When you think about it now, the stuff that they have now, it's incredible. Like even looking at the Dungeon Master screens now, they're like super deluxe, awesome Dungeon Master screens that would last forever, compared to the little cardboard things that somebody probably cut out originally from, their Kellogg Special K box, right, and painted the other side.
That was half the fun.
Yeah,
it was. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Go
That's
ahead.
okay, because that gets with the idea. Like Jack said, he stopped at second. There are people who produce new material for, I think, like every version of D&D.
Nice.
Like
the internet.
Yeah, and they do them PDF, because I picked up a bunch of stuff for White Box D&D just like a couple months ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's because what happened was there are people who that was their first one, and that was what they're used to, and that's what they like. And then a couple years ago, TSR released a new version, and it's very nice. It comes in like a wooden box and has fancy dice, and it's reprints of all of the books.
Right.
And that got more people in, and I think when they did that, you had just enough that these little gaming companies will do, and they're usually only like 10 pages or so, these little PDFs that, yeah, it's new material for the very original D&D.
Right.
But it's because people can pick and choose.
Well, this is interesting because I looked up on the website. Here we go. Hyperlink. It's called 6 Best Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Uh-huh.
And so what they do is they have people recommend them and people that don't recommend. And Dungeons and Dragons Edition 5 is 10 recommended, 2 not recommended.
Right.
And then second edition is the next best, which is 4 recommended, 1 not recommended. And then it goes down to like fourth edition, 7 recommended, 7 not recommended.
Right.
And then the 3.5 Pathfinder, 6 recommended, 5 don't recommend it. And I'm thinking to myself, I'll bet you that one of the reasons why second edition is up there is like so few people have played it.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody's going to recommend or not recommend it because they can't play it. So no wonder that the 5th edition is the hottest thing there because it's the latest one out.
Yeah.
All these people are playing it that are going to be on the website.
Yep.
And then you get this sort of strange mix. Everybody hates 4, so you've got a mixture of some who really loved it, lots of people who really hated it. And so can you ever really have an honest, definitive ranking of the 5 different systems as to which is better? I don't think you can.
Well, it depends.
You probably can. No, I'd say you probably can. I mean, if you had people that have actually played all the different versions and could look at it objectively, I mean, you could have... you could have rating. Oh, that would be Dawn, probably. I have a feeling. Although Dawn hasn't played 5th, so that disqualifies you, Dawn. But I know I have a funny feeling I could probably find someone who has. I think I know someone who probably has, besides you, I mean. Yeah, I mean, there are people that could actually look at it objectively and say which ones are better. Although Don's already made his clear. He's already biased towards 3rd edition or maybe 3.5. Take your pick.
Well, I like 3rd just because I didn't want to buy everything again.
Right.
Well, here's my argument against that, in the respect that how can you make those definitions? It really depends on what you look for in a game. And Dungeons & Dragons is so large. If you sit there and you say, yeah, it's the greatest one for going in and just coming up with a whole bunch of treasure, or is it the greatest one for doing? Which one's the best for actual role playing characters? Which one's the easiest to DM? Which there's 1,000 different things you're going to have to ask about it, as opposed to some sort of very small. There's a lot of role-playing games that are much more narrow in scope, and you can actually take a look at the system a whole lot better as to how it deals with things. But when you've got similar systems based upon each other, other than from what it sounds like 4 is a vast diversion from what the other ones are based. It's not... I think the biggest complaint I heard from people about 2nd edition is that they don't understand Thaco. And which isn't hard to understand, but they just like to psych themselves out about it. It's still D&D. You know what I mean? There's just yeah. Sometimes armor classes, armor class went from being it's good to have it as minus to it's good to have it as plus.
Yeah.
That was like the big change, right?
Because the Thaco thing comes from AD&D. That was near the end run of AD&D. They did that.
You're right.
And that's your statement there is kind of funny, because there was a cartoon in one of the Dragon magazines where they run into a lich, and the group is all it's when 3rd edition was out, and the group is all laughing. Oh, look, like you look like your fashion sense hasn't changed in like 20 years. What do you mean? This is the height of evil fashion. Yeah, maybe when 0 was a good armor class, and they all laugh at him and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I just sent you guys links too for Ranker, and Ranker puts Dungeons and Dragons as the top game of all role-playing, and Shadowrun is 2nd, Call of Cthulhu is 3, Vampire the Masquerade, it goes on. Although I call shenanigans on this because it doesn't have Space 1889 anywhere on the list, and so therefore it is biased and not existent, so we're just going to ignore it.
Which Star Wars is he actually referring to? I think he's referring to, let's take a quick peek.
It looks like the original.
Which original?
But if you click on, here's the problem. If you click on the link, it takes you to the Amazon one for the most recent Star Wars role-playing game,
that's not it.
Which is definitely not it. Not in any way, shape, or form. Because the original West End Games was the maker of the original Star Wars role-playing game.
Which I have that as well.
Both originals. There's two editions.
Yeah, I have one of them myself.
1st and 2nd.
Yep.
I think I have the 2nd edition myself too. So, so that was my argument about it, is that you're going to have to, first of all, you have to agree upon what is it you're going to be measuring to see which one of the versions and editions is the best. Because there's so many things you could focus on, because it is such a large role-playing system that is really, for the most part, variations on the same theme.
Yeah. Because
I can see that.
That's the idea with anything that you want to rate. You have to say, well, what do you mean by good? Because having played a bajillion different versions of D&D, I discovered that I really do like them all, because each one is a different experience.
I can see that.
Yeah.
They're all variations of the same theme, but there's little things that make them different. Like if I had friends anymore, I would run a white box. I would run a white box campaign.
Just for fun?
Yeah, because it's totally different. I had this idea for doing D&D campaigns that when you look at the different editions, each edition, because like I said, this idea of story becomes more important. Each edition is more expansive with what it covers and how the settings work. So I was picturing you'd run white box D&D as a very simple campaign. It's a simple kingdom. The one that I designed, there's like 6 cities all together, period. And it kind of feels more like a medieval flavored ancient Greece, like the Heroes of Legend type era.
There's almost a more innocence attached to the whole white box.
Kind of, yeah.
The basics. Yeah.
Oh no, and that's exactly it. And then you get to like the red box one, and it's more high fantasy, because the rules just basically cover like action-packed heroics.
Yep.
And then you get to AD&D. AD&D is very similar, but it's more the Conan, Robert E. Howard type thing, because now my character can die of dysentery and ear parasites as well as getting stabbed to death. And the world itself affects the character more, even with that idea of I have to find teachers, I have to pay for upkeep. That's more of a gritty the world kind of thing is sinking us. And then you get to second, and second plays a lot like the red box, except there's more variety. Right. So it's this more kind of heroic world, but it's super expansive because there's just so many things around each corner. Mm-hmm. And you get to like third and 3.5. And because there's so much customization that you do with like your characters and even the setting, like they do rules for how towns and that work. It's structured, but there's a lot you can monkey with. And it gives you this feel of establishment, because when I go into town looking to sell the magic items I have, there's actual rules for how much can merchants in town scrape together to pay for the shit that I bring in. Mm-hmm. Which no other version took that kind of thing into account. But now you've got this give and take between the world, and like I said, they're all very, very different, and I could see running any of them as a campaign.
Yes, there's this great little graphic that's called Orc with a Pie that I've sent you guys to, and it's quite, because it's supposed to describe all the different editions. So very briefly, first edition, there is an orc with a pie in a 10x10 room. You want the pie. What do? Second edition, you enter a small, dimly lit room with dark granite walls that look like they've never been cleaned. Standing before you is a smelly, snarling, dark mire orc, wearing rough and tattered leather armor and carrying a crude and rusty longsword. With a low growl, he introduces himself as Ermac, son of Krog, son of Ermac. In his rough, calloused hands, he holds a large, lattice strawberry, rhubarb, and mint pie, still steaming. And its fantastic aroma gently wafts towards you, arousing your appetite and reminding you that a long ago brunch with Marcomedes, the Wizard of Redstone. What do? Third edition. These are lots faster. With your spots check, you notice an orc warrior standing in the center of a 10x10 room. He appears to be holding some sort of pastry. And with your profession, pastry chef, roll, you identify it as a pie. What do? Fourth edition, you see a solo brute in a 2 square by 2 square room. It has some treasure. How do you fight it? Fifth edition, in a small, otherwise empty room, there is a burly orc warrior holding a strawberry pie. The pie looks delicious. What do? Apparently somebody wrote, this is like the best description of the 5 editions I've ever seen. So
works pretty good.
Huh. Okay.
Hyperlink.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, the audience can find it in the links for the show. Yeah, well, that's interesting. That really is. Out of curiosity, what did second edition have that it would encourage such astounding detail in your characters and everything? Or is that just the result of that super customization I was mentioning before?
I think it had just a lot of great detail and stuff. I just it just opened up the world. That's why I loved it the most. When I loved it. Advanced had more technical stuff. But I found that there was just so many more options for various different things. Like I said, all the kit classes came out in second edition. So suddenly you weren't just looking at, the wizard illusionist options. You were looking at like 10 different kinds of wizards, right? And mixing and matching. So like I remember you could have a wizard that was a warrior wizard. Which was really unusual, but if he wore any armor, he couldn't cast spells, or there was very limited spells he could cast because he was using a sword. So before that, if you were running a wizard and be up to that point, you had a staff, a dart, and a dagger. Those were your 3 options for weapons.
I think they added sling.
Yeah, and sling, that's right. And if you were a priest or a cleric, you couldn't hit anybody. You couldn't use a sword, right? So you had to use, not a flail. A mace. Yep. Mace was one of your big ones. For some reason, you could get a crossbow.
It depends on the edition.
Yeah, it depends on the edition, yeah. So there was a lot of limitations. A lot of people played warrior characters so they could just use any kind of weapon they wanted. But when the kit classes came out, they sat there and they said, if you're going to be a savage wizard, you get to use these weapons. If you're going to be this kind of wizard, you get to use these kind of weapons. It really allowed people, and it wasn't like you weren't hampered by the rules as much as they sort of unleashed you into thinking, wow, you're right, there's a whole bunch of different ways I could look at this. Which was kind of cool. And a lot of those were taken directly from Dragon Magazine articles. Yeah. And just bound into these kit classes before. But it was sort of like once they had the framework of advanced D&D to play with, people started saying, well, what if you created this kind of character? Like I actually sent stuff into Dragon Magazine, totally rejected, but I sent in a Dragon Slayer character class. And I figured all that out kind of thing too, because I thought, well, hey, this is another kind of warrior class. It'd be kind of fun. Yeah. So that was what I liked about second edition, and I had to laugh when I read that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Plus, second was the one where they really started getting into different settings.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of. They also at that point you were getting novelizations and that, so the settings like the Spelljammers, there'd be a lot of flavor that would go along with in the books, and the same thing like Ravenloft was almost entirely based on that idea.
Yep.
Yeah, that was all descriptions, and they'd do stories and that related to the different settings.
That makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Okay, so I think we've covered all the editions of D&D. Then we've covered out to 5, and 5, of course, came out. I think was 2016. Was it
15 or 16? Yeah, it's really
15
recent.
or 16. It's pretty recent. 14 actually. I'm wrong. 14. Whatever.
Okay.
Anyway, so all right. So D&D, and I think we've also covered that D&D was very influential, especially in pop culture, in many ways. I mean. Going to video games, I would argue that pretty much the entire fantasy role-playing video game industry is D&D.
Yeah.
They're all ultimately versions of D&D. Even the Japanese stuff, like Final Fantasy, started out as D&D rips. And so D&D has been hugely influential, and I'm going to assume that D&D is like everything else 80s, that eventually our generation will figure out a way to make a movie series or something out of it, I would imagine. And so that continues to influence things.
Well, I forgot to mention the fact that after university, I created my own online forum,
Right.
and played for like 4 or 5 years a continuing quest game, which you can still read. You can still go to the website and read through it, which eventually I do want to make into like an ongoing audio drama series or a series of books, because it turned out so well. It's called the Cameland Quest.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, we all have those great stories. I'm just glad I got a chance to play them online, to write them down.
Right.
And write them with my... So I would, like, write a post of what was happening for the day, and then people would respond, and then in the thread, I would just constantly respond to them, and then anytime a new event would happen, I would be writing a new post kind of thing. So
Right.
it worked out kind of well, so...
I can see
Anyway,
that.
didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah.
No,
so
that's cool.
They're there. There's a ton of people that are there out there, and like I said, I figured out I have over 2,000 pages worth of text to the Cameland Quest.
Wow.
And at least I think I broke them up into 4 books. So.
Uh-huh.
Huh.
I'm sure there's some George R. R. Martin fans who listen to that and go, sure.
Exactly.
So you have a book. All right, yeah, all right. Because fantasy fans are known for loving their massive tomes.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
that's a fantasy standard pretty much, that if you can't pump out 1,000-word novels every couple months, you're not a fantasy writer. You're definitely not. Who's the top fantasy writer right now? Not George R. R. Martin, but there's a guy. Oh crap! He wrote Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is the man. He just pumps that stuff out. He just pumps out these doorstops every couple months. And he's pretty astounding. Anyway, so the fantasy genre as we know it in books is basically Dungeons and Dragons.
Yep.
I mean,
I would be surprised if anybody writes as much as Piers Anthony did. Because he would come up with like all of his ideas during the year, and then in the summertime he would sit down in his like little summer place, and he would just type out 4 or 5 books for the year. That's why I have like so many, like A Spell for Chameleon, all the Xanth books that lasted forever and ever, right?
Yep.
And by the way, those are going to be a movie series as well.
I was going to say, yeah, they're making Xanth. I don't know how that's going to work, but okay, sure.
Yep. Sure. So I mean, yeah, I would probably put almost anybody up against him for the amount of just fantasy stuff that comes out. Is crazy amount, and I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying
for
he
the
writes
amount.
a lot.
Well,
yes,
that's the thing, right? In the current self-publishing era, there's a lot of fantasy writers or just writers online who now they're doing practically the new pulp thing, where they're writing to survive, right? So they're churning this stuff out. Like astounding, like thousands of words per day, many thousands of words per day, and then they just hand them. They finish them. They hand them off to their editor, and we'll talk about that as a whole episode sometime.
Yeah,
but
editor. Oh wow.
Well, yeah,
Swanky.
some of them some of them are using editors. Some of them are not. Some of them are just hitting publish right away. They're just compiling them and hitting publish. But they gain a reputation fairly quick, and then the author has to develop a new pen name and start the cycle all over again.
That's right.
Okay, but anyway, so D&D. I think we've covered most of it, actually. I mean,
like all
Don,
11 versions.
Well, yeah, exactly. So what else can we say about Dungeons and Dragons? Jack, what else can we say about D&D that we haven't said so far?
It's a cultural icon.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly. I mean, you cannot escape. I think it's one of those things that everybody knows.
Yeah.
If you say D&D, everybody knows what you're talking about. So there's very few things that have sort of hit the zeitgeist as powerfully as Dungeons and Dragons does. And you could have argued that maybe nobody had heard of it too much, like outside of players. But you're right. Stranger Things brought it back, and suddenly there's like a whole new group of people who love it. I mean, there was an episode they did in Community of it. There's two. Yeah. There you go. There's the guy who did Community. He's running an online. He won't call it Dungeons and Dragons, but it's totally Dungeons and Dragons. Television show where he sits on stage and they play D&D and they have somebody animate it afterwards.
Harmon Quest.
Harmon Quest. So I mean, it's not something. I thought it was going to die when video games came out. I really thought that role-playing games and stuff like that. But I think it's actually having a renaissance because I think people, despite what all your parents used to tell you, it actually brings people together in a healthy social manner. And I think that's what people are noticing is like, yeah, I'm actually inviting people over. We're having something to eat and we're playing, role-playing games together. And we're doing something that can really enhance somebody's social abilities. And the idea of just the word role play has become used as a regular basis because of D&D. I mean, they use it in psychology. They use it in school classrooms. Okay, we're going to have a little role play about this situation kind of thing. They may not roll the dice, but it's the same kind of thing. You're going to take on the character of this. And so what used to be something was almost impossible to try to describe to somebody. Like, okay, so how do I play Dungeons & Dragons? Okay, I'm going to tell you this right now. The first time I'm going to tell you how to play Dungeons & Dragons, you won't know. But the second time, you'll understand. Right? So come back next week, and then you'll be able to get it. The first week, but that's gone. We can make allusions to stuff on, like you say, video games, which is all based character stuff and stats on Dungeons and Dragons, and people have seen it through all sorts of medium. We've gotten to a point that it's literally part of the human DNA at this point.
Well, North American culture in that at this point.
Well, you just said in Japan as well.
That's true. Okay, valid point.
I'd say all through Europe. Great Britain.
Europe as well.
I
don't know about China.
No, they didn't get it. Here, China's weird, though. They got it, but they got it through Japanese video games. So they all know all the D&D terminology, but they know it because Chinese are nuts about computer games, about like online role-playing games and role-playing games and that in general. Yeah. They adore them. But they got it all through Japan's video games, which of course got them from D&D.
Right.
I don't think China has ever had... That's something to look into. I don't think they've ever had a role-playing community, really. It's not a tabletop. I don't think it ever really took off there. Unfortunately, they were... Remember, China was a closed country at the time. They were kind of worried about survival, mostly, day-to-day stuff, during the 1980s. Yeah. So, I don't think China ever did. I don't think it caught on in India. Again, I don't know this for sure, but it seems like it was something that now South America it caught on. Yeah. I've heard that South America, especially Brazil, role-playing games were super big.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, they had a worldwide Dungeons and Dragons game day. I'm noticing. I don't know what it was, but it's a prevention. I guess it was the coast, and over 40 countries. Yep. Were involved. So it's not just limited to North America.
Right. I can tell you, I wish my Chinese was better, but there's a game store near my mother-in-law's place in Taipei, Taiwan. And I've walked by it. I haven't gone into it, but they've actually got D&D posters up in the front window. Now, I'm pretty sure that they're mostly involved with card games and such, but no, I'm pretty sure there is an actual D&D, culture or whatever going on in Taipei, in Taiwan, that they actually do have it, but it won't be mainstream. It'll be, it'll be a subculture.
For now.
Yeah. At best. Yeah, exactly. So I can tell you. So there's some of the Chinese-speaking world anyway does actually play D&D. I'd probably find something in Hong Kong too if I went looking.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
China proper, maybe now there might be a little bit of a subculture in like Shanghai, maybe Beijing, but again, very small, and it's not part of their regular culture anyway.
Right.
But North America, most people still know. If I mention Dungeons and Dragons to my students, I bet most of them. Well, now thanks to Stranger Things, they'll all know what it is. But even before Stranger Things, I bet most of them would at least know or have heard of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
I bet almost none of them would have played it, but I would bet most of them would know what it was, or at least they might think it was a computer game. Though that's the only thing.
Well, it was. There was a few of them.
It is. Yeah, exactly. Well, there was a D&D online.
Neverwinter Nights was like the official D&D game. I remember that was like a real role-playing sort of Diablo style game.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was using all the D&D rules. So.
Yep. Yeah. That was the original AD&D online game anyway.
Right.
And then since then there is even an actual D&D online. Like that was their attempt to cash in on the whole World of Warcraft thing, but I think it crashed and burned.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay.
So that one didn't work out so well. Let's see. It's influenced music, of course, not just Led Zeppelin, but there have been lots of bands that have had D&D references or been involved with D&D at one point or another. TV, there's a lot of TV shows make references to D&D. Stranger Things being the most popular and recent, but not the only one.
Yeah, the Community episodes I think are the best, especially if you can see the second one.
Mm-hmm.
With the old guy.
I haven't seen it, so I can't say.
It has my favorite scene where they have it's the one character. He's an old guy and his son is a huge fan, and they're playing a campaign because they successfully ran a campaign in an earlier episode. And this old guy is playing like this, like halfling. And there's a scene where they're attacked by hobgoblins. The old guy's like, I run up and I punch him in the heart. And he roll. And you miss. What do you mean I miss? When I was in Nom, I punched so many people in the heart. How could I miss? Yeah, but you weren't a 4-foot halfling running through 3-foot grass to hit a 6-foot monster. All right, good point.
I always like Chang, the character Chang, when he's like he comes and he's like dressed up as in complete full dark elf makeup, right? And they go, "Wow, good job dressing up," and he's like, "Dressing up?" This is how he showed up, right? And he dies in the first 30 seconds, like he's gone in the game.
Wasn't that Dingleberry?
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm Dingleberry.
Yep.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff.
Exactly. So, Don, any final thoughts about D&D before we get going?
I think it's one of them things that's always going to be around, and I think it's an important event, I'll say, because it was the first time you really had the combination of, we'll say, math and physics and storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important because when you look at things like video games and that, a lot of what we play nowadays and a lot of the kind of games that we're likely to have in the future, that whole idea, those whole algorithms are, the genealogy was right back to the original D&D, to that idea of converting real world events and characters and human beings to formulas and algorithms.
Wow. Yeah, I see your point. So in some ways, it may eventually end up affecting even artificial intelligence and the way we develop computer systems that work with people. Wow. Yeah. I mean, if you want to be technical about it, even the whole idea of the Matrix and virtual reality, some of that is Dungeons and Dragons.
Yep.
And no doubt we will be using it, of course, for Dungeons and Dragons type games and everything. Once we can stop people from throwing up after they've been playing it for 20 minutes.
That just sounds like my old campaigns.
Ooh, ba-dum-bum. Okay, so on that note, I think I'm going to bring this gaming session to a close.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have any particular thoughts about D&D myself, other than that I actually agree with, Don, that each version has its own flavor. I'm somewhat fond of the white box. I think that third edition probably was the best one they put out, but I can see the appeal to second. So I'm totally in the middle on all this because, like I said, this isn't really my genre of choice.
True neutral.
True neutral, exactly. I'm true lawful neutral. But I do accept that D&D has been a part of my life, whether I wanted it to or not, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's awesome, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that D&D will continue to be a part of our culture for a very long time in some form or another. Mm-hmm. And that I'm really glad that some people are actually starting to get into it as a social experience once more. Because I think that especially the current generation needs more actual social experiences that involve other human beings and preferably don't involve phones or computers. But that's just me being, old school. All right. On that note, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for listening, everyone. And good night. Happy gaming.
Thanks for the memories.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to hear more or join the conversation, come visit us at obeythedna.com. You can also find us on iTunes or whatever fine podcast site forgot to lock their back door. So until next time, remember that to master the nerdly arts takes time, practice, and enough Coca-Cola to drop a rhino. See ya! Come on over and join the conversation at obeythedna.com, where you will find show notes and more.